right now. So I'm going to present in 15 minutes our presentation, our welcome to our webinar. Right now, okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on capitalism of disaster in the Caribbean, tourism, development, and displacement of local communities. This is a webinar organized by our partnership, a broad project called Food, Land, and Climate Justice in the Caribbean. This partnership explores community-based food systems, land natural resources management, and conservation in the Greater Caribbean. The aim is to enhance existing research, contribute to the co-production and exchange of knowledge, and to the identification of bottom-up community-led practices as the most effective ways of addressing the interconnected challenges of food insecurity and climate change in the region. Climate change is shaping anew the everyday lives of current and future generations, both locally and globally, for land and natural processes upon which its productivity and autonomy is being degraded. For people in the Caribbean region, especially in small islands, vulnerability to the effects of climate change is particularly significant. We have extreme weather, biodiversity loss, limited access to land, safe, and water, and increased political dependency upon trade to meet food needs. Normally, the voices of the Caribbean people, their experiences, their histories, knowledge, and approaches to climate change are often excluded from political and academic considerations. This project is a structure around a partnership between community organizations and academics based in Antigua, Barbuda, Belize, Colombia, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. They are McChesney George Secondary School in Antigua and Barbuda, the Library of African and Indigenous Studies in Belize, the Raizal Youth Organization in the archipelago de San Andrés and all Providence and Catalina Islands, the Bernard Lodge Farmers Association in Jamaica, the Fideicomiso of the Caño Martín Peña Community Land Trust in Puerto Rico. And the academic partners are University of Bristol, University of West Indies, Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and University of Antwerp. Okay. We have seen in the Caribbean region that the peoples having been increasingly exposed to two interconnected threats, the intensification of climate events and the rapid surge in foreign investments that privatize large tracts of the islands for the purpose of luxury real estate. Hurricanes and other natural disasters are used as an opportunity for political and economic elites to dispossess local communities of their land and add the land to the hostile international real estate market. This happened in 2017 in Barbuda, where the central government of Antigua and Barbuda took advantage of Hurricane Irma to dismantle a centuries-old communal land tenure system that offered protection for Barbudans from long resistance of the local community. This happened also in 2020 in the island of Old Providence, where the Colombian government, despite years of long resistance of the local community, is pushing to install a coast guard and touristic mega projects after the island was badly hit by Hurricane Iota. Evacuations of local communities are put in place on the pretense of unsafety and uninhabitability, but often they are used to change local land laws. The inhabitants of Vieques, an island in Puerto Rico, successfully organized against enforced the departure of the US Marine in the 2000, while Hurricane Maria, which hit in 2017, is now used to exhaust and displace the local population through the lack of basic local services. In Grenada, a marine park is being built in a protected mangrove area of high ecological value. In Belize, the proposed port of Belize Cruise Terminal is expected to damage the natural protection against storms and hurricanes for coastal communities. All over the Caribbean region, communities and indigenous peoples are facing similar challenges, and the urge to resist and create solidarity. In addition, crises of food insecurity in the region, which deepened with COVID-19, are compounded with the displacement of communities and the degradation of the environment upon which their lives, livelihoods, and food sovereignty depends. Local communities are standing up against this re-colonisation. This webinar brings several leaders from Caribbean communities together to discuss community organization and mobilization to combat this dispossession of land and other forms of disaster capitalism. The event provides an opportunity for activists, community members, scholars, development professionals, and policymakers from all over the world to hear from the communities directly and how they are affected by and organized against disaster capitalism. We will hear from community leaders from Barbuda, Old Providence and Catalina Islands, Vieques-Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Belize, and Grenada. Pambana Bassett is going to be the moderator of this panel. Pambana is an organizer from Harare, Zimbabwe, and New York City, USA, who works on campaigns for reparations, food sovereignty, African and indigenous popular education and land rights, aligned with grassroots organizations across Central America and the Caribbean. John Massington in Antigua and Barbuda is one of our participants. He is involved with increasing public awareness in conservation issues, taking ideas and concerns to the larger media outlets in Antigua and Barbuda. He advocates to formulate public policy in Barbuda. He is a leader in a non-island organizations such as the Barbuda Farming Co-op and the Barbuda Land Rights Committee. Mr. Mussington actively agitates to promote awareness of resource management issues. He actively promotes and develops policies that seek to conserve the natural and built environment. He is an energetic and strong voice on the island of Barbuda when it comes to environmental protection and conservation. The tireless drive to raise awareness despite, at times, its unpopularity is why he is respected and admired by his fellow Barbudans and international colleagues. Jane Nurse from Grenada. She is an enterprising human ecologist. She has been a climate justice activist in the UNFCCC and has worked as sustainability change agent for various NGOs, Swansea University and the World Bank. As a former Chevening and Shelby Davis United World College scholar, she holds a master's on environmental laws and sustainable development from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and a bachelor in human ecology from the College of the Atlantic. Edgar J. Stephens from Old Providence, Colombia, fisherman, Rizal Guard leader, president of iFish Association from Old Providence and Catalina Islands. He's the leader of the Dignity Camp installed 100 days ago by the fishermen of Old Providence on the ruins of the Fish and Farm Cooperative after the passage of Hurricane Iota, in rejection of National Navy's claims to build an illegal Coast Guard station in the mangrove buffer of the mouth of Bowden Stream, which has become a benchmark in the organized social rights resistance struggle. For 100 days, the rise of diaspora, the civic veeduría of all Providence, farmers, artists, housewives, community members, academics, teachers, professionals, cultural managers, athletes, social activists, informal workers, and many furthermore have accompanied this camp of resistance in what was initially a fight focused on the illegal Coast Guard station, but today is a platform of struggle in the formation of a permanent civic committee for dignity. For 100 days, they have opposed with determination and creativity and inspire also the spirit of their ancestors, the endless 7 months of a failed reconstruction management by the Colombian government. Pamela Gonzalez, lawyer and community leader from Vieques-Puerto, Rico, is also a participant. Pamela was raised in Vieques since the age of 3, where she completed all her schooling. She spent 1 year in the Faroe Islands as an exchange student that then attended university, BA in journalism, psychology, and graduated from University of Illinois Law School in 2001. She returned to live in Vieques on a full-time basis in 2016 and became involved with different community and grassroots organizations after the impact of Hurricane Irma and Maria. She currently serves on the board of Isla Nena Composta and the Episcopal Church, as well as in the Colectivo Somos Más que 100, advocating for better maritime transportation and quality of life for the residents of Vieques and Culebra. And finally, Yaya Marin Coleman from Belize. She's called herself as a spirit having a human experience. As an African woman, being in Belize for the past 15 years, she has contributed to the Belizean community's growth and development as a community worker and grassroots journalist. Creme Mandala is the only independent Black-owned media house in the region in Southside Belize City. As the chairperson of UBAD Educational Foundation, a 25 years old community-rooted organization whose focus has been consciousness raising, she had the joys and frustrations of working with Belizeans in rural and urban spaces. UEF has demonstrated the solidarity with our African and indigenous peoples in their struggle for social justice in the region by hosting delegations in Belize, signing solidarity statements, and she has traveled with the Chiapas support committees and Witness for Peace in Central and South America to learn from African and indigenous peoples what their truths are as they collectively defended their lands and people from oppressors within the Western colonial and capitalist systems. And finally, Hugh Johnson's public relations officers from Bernard Lodge Farmers Group in Jamaica. He is the board member of a Jamaican Agricultural Society, president of Small Business Association Jamaica, and vice president of the Cocoa Farmers Organizations, and sit on several local boards. Welcome, everybody. I'm giving the word right now to our moderator, Pambana Bassett. Thank you all for being here with us.
Greetings. Thank you so much, Catalina, and greetings to everyone. Morning, noon, evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm calling in from the territories of the Siboney and the Guanahatabes, the Taino and Arawak territories in Havana, Cuba. Also a land of palenques, cumbes, maroon struggles, slave rebellions, and a revolutionary project for the last 6 decades that has furthered and advanced and defended the right to land, to health, to education, a life with dignity for the poor and for the majorities, and internationalism. We're so excited about this panel of people on the front lines in defending a new model in the face of incredible horrors. We're in a moment of incredible upheaval and many possibilities and the necessity to build a new world. We have millions of deaths that were preventable from COVID, people living in incredible precarity in terms of their economic situation, their right to land, the right to fulfill their lives with dignity. As Catalina shared, the Caribbean is a region in which climate disaster is felt acutely. It's also a member of the Global South, which has witnessed an incredible vaccine apartheid, incredible horrors in terms of structural adjustment and neoliberalism, particularly pushed through during disasters, and in attempts to try to stop the projects of the people, which is one in which the people enjoy the fruits of their labor, and the violence and military aggression, the dispossession of people's lands, people's cultural practices, people's right to their labor is an attempt to silence the people's movement. And so we hope that this will recenter the people as those with the answers for the world we need to build. And because it's important to note that the Caribbean has always, in its entire history, punched above its weight, has always been at the center of internationalism, of slave rebellions, burning down plantations, and putting forth the idea of nationhood and popular movements that are rooted in the well-being of most peoples. The Caribbean has played an incredible role in integration, despite the ways that colonialism has attempted to fragment and divide our peoples. The people of the Caribbean, a Black and Indigenous people, have always, always, always furthered an agenda that is good for the entire earth and the globe. So in this moment of disaster capitalism, in which in all of these territories, there have been attempts to push through liberal economic policies and really horrible military aggression, it's important that we center the fisher folk, the farmers, the advocates, the activists, and the media makers today. In Barbuda, where there's a stunning example of communal land tenure in the face of capitalism's attempts to privatize everything. Grenada has such an incredible history of a movement that's shown us that small islands can chart a new destiny. And although they will face military aggression, particularly from the US and European aggressors, that the people will prevail. In Old Providence and Santa Catalina, we have an example of people, despite having faced the horrors of hurricanes and disasters, demanding that their land be free of a Navy base and military presence, and that the land be destined for the people and to feed us, to commune with our ancestors, and because the earth has its own rights. In Puerto Rico, we have the vote at the UN for sovereignty. It is a long battle that the Puerto Rican people have been struggling. The sister from Vieques knows well the ways in which military bases are forced upon people, but the people will never give up. In Belize, Sister Yaya will be speaking about the tremendous power of unions, that is worker power, labor power, to chart a new path. Recently, Emancipation Day declared, and the Belizean peoples work to reclaim histories of us as Black people stolen from our territories, but who have waged Black liberation since. Also, the Maya have recently won some important gains in the courts. The Bernard Farmers Association pushing within Jamaica, a land of slave rebellions, an alternative model that's focused primarily on small scale farming. So it's just an incredible panel. I have the bad luck of having to cut people short because there are only 10 minutes to share, but there will be discussion after each of our presenters speaks. And we hope that this will be a continuation of many centuries of conversations about how we can have a life with freedom, and freedom meaning rights for the majorities and for oppressed peoples. So first I introduce Mr. John Mussington. Catalina gave your extensive bio, principal educator from Mackenzie Secondary School in Barbuda. Mr. Mussington, are you able to speak now?
Yes, I am. Okay, thank you, Pambana. Greetings, colleagues, friends, supporters from around the world. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor this morning to be in this gathering. Today, I'm going to give you some information about our very small island here, Barbuda. I'm going to tell you a little about our history and why we happen to have a particular land system that we do have. I'm also going to tell you about when our lives changed in 2017 in that worst Atlantic storm up until that time, Hurricane Irma. And then I'm going to share with you some of the things that we have been doing, why I am able to be speaking with you here this morning. So first of all, let me tell you a story. On August 1st in 1834, when the Emancipation Proclamation was declared to enslave people in Antigua, Antigua is our sister island, the larger of our twin island states. The people in Barbuda were not included in that proclamation. The Barbudan persons heard about that proclamation and they said, what about us? And so literally at that point, we decided to free ourselves and stop being slaves. Now, Barbudans made that declaration and they were able to do so because up until that point, they had to depend on the resources of Barbuda, the fish, the lobster, the forestry, in order to fend for themselves. Barbuda was never a plantation in the sense of the other Caribbean islands where sugarcane and other crops were grown. So the Barbudans mostly were artisans, and because of the economics of the slave system then, cheap in terms of how you manage the labor force, we were left up to ourselves in terms of having to live off of that land. So when emancipation came about, it was no problem in terms of us making that decision that we're just going to continue. Now, from 1901, we had an ordinance in the British system, the British law system, which sought to determine how land was supposed to be utilized in Barbuda. Now, that came about in 1901 because it was about the time when the last leaseholder for Barbuda was about to give up the lease. And something fantastic happened then. The Barbudans made representation to the British government for them to lease the island before giving it to someone else. Of course, they were turned down, and the British decided to annex Barbuda to Antigua instead. So that is how we became Antigua and Barbuda. Now, there was also in the common law for the British this prescription law, which says that if you were living on a particular piece of land for a certain amount of time, then you can claim under that prescription act to own it. Barbudans heard about that, and they actually sent a delegation to the neighboring island of St. Kitts Nevis to make representation to basically say that we own Barbuda. But of course, during those times, those things were not successful. So 1901, 1976, 1904, there was an amendment to that land. Then 1976, there was the Local Government Act. That's a piece of legislation which brought into being the Barbuda local government called the Barbuda Council. And that essentially put a management structure in place in terms of how land and resources operated at Barbuda. So what I'm trying to paint for you is a picture of a history of this communal ownership of an entire island, which is unique in the Leeward Islands. And in 2007, that became even firmer when there was a Barbuda Land Act passed. And in that Land Act, it started out with saying this: all lands in Barbuda are owned in common by the people of Barbuda, and land shall not be sold. So that took place in 2007. So from 1901 right up to 2007, we had a legislative agenda which gave us certain rights to this land. So as Barbudans, that is our belief, and that has always been our way of life. Now, the roots of that is all about survival and how you maintain yourselves using resources. Barbuda is not uncommon in that you have persons, for example, the Maroons in Jamaica, they have a communal system of ownership. The Kalinago in Dominica, they have the same system. In Suriname, the Garifuna from many of the South American countries, they have that system. So what I'm speaking about is not unusual in that you have persons coming of African origin who have this sense of ownership over the lands because it is their lifeblood, that is the way they survive. Now I'm painting that picture so that we can understand and the rest of the speakers can basically sympathize with us because they too are undergoing the same thing. Now, one of the unique features about that communal ownership, especially in this age of climate crisis, is that you notice those parts of the Caribbean, which you can quote unquote call virgin territory. One of the unique things about them is that you find the natural resources are well managed. And the reason for that, and scientists over the past couple of decades have realized that the best managers of any natural resource are the people who use it and own it from day to day. So Barbuda, prior to 2017, stood out as a gem in the Caribbean. And many of the other territories where indigenous people can say the same. Because what we have been doing over centuries is managing and sustainably using those resources so that they're not exhausted. So that in itself has turned out to be a kind of curse for us. Because in today's world, when resources are being depleted, what does the developed countries want? What are the capitalists looking for? These gems where resources are fresh. So let's fast forward to 2017. We were slammed by a category 5 plus hurricane, the first we've ever seen in living memory in the Caribbean. Barbuda is flat. We have been contending with the effects of climate change for quite a few years now. And so when that hurricane slammed into us, we were not killed outright. We were able to survive because we had adapted over the years in terms of dealing with these natural phenomena. We had our first category 5 in 1995. So we were able to survive that onslaught. But then something strange began to happen. 2017, the day after the hurricane, we heard our administration, our central government, on the airwaves say, Barbuda is 95% destroyed. It is uninhabitable. When that statement was made, I was sitting in my home having breakfast with my family who had survived that storm. So I said, wait, what is going on here? Couldn't be this Barbuda they're talking about. But then the narrative started, and I want you to pay attention because it seems that there's a playbook which is used. So there was another storm coming, and the excuse was used, look, for the sake of the people of Barbuda, we're going to evacuate them from the island for their own protection. And so the majority of persons were taken from Barbuda under a forced and mandatory evacuation order. I did not move, and there are several Barbudans like me who did not move. So that hurricane, which was supposed to come, did not come, it did not strike the island, but then the mandatory evacuation was still in place. I was taken from the island by helicopter on the military guard, okay? Then is when we realized something strange is happening. Because when we were taken from Barbuda, lots of persons began to visit the island when we could not come back, and there were surveys being done. And what we found out was that persons were developing a master tourism plan, which involved the creation of an exclusive residential community. These were high-end, wealthy people who were going to buy property. There was going to be a real estate market in Barbuda now. Remember, land on our land could not be sold. But you had persons who were planning to build over 500 luxury properties to develop an exclusive community to start off a real estate market. So we decided to start pushback. And we are here now because of the efforts we have made in terms of exposing a lot of what took place. And what has become clear to us is that these pristine islands, rainforests, resources that indigenous people have today, the eyes of other quote-unquote wealthy persons are focused on that. And they are going to attempt to take it away from you using the excuse of a disaster. So Hurricane Irma in 2017, there was Maria that same year, and Santa Catalina got hit the same way. And the playbook is very clear in terms of how these things are being done. Incidentally,
so sorry, brother.
Yes, I'm going to wrap now.
So sorry to cut you short. Thank you. Time for questions. Right. Your last one. Okay, thank you so much for planting for us the problem at hand, which is just rapacious greed, local elite that has been bought off by corporations and is working hand in hand with them to dispossess the people of their land. And you also gave us an example of a solution, collectively held lands or communal land tenure, which flies in the face of capitalism, but is certainly not an alien concept to us as Black and Indigenous peoples. You gave us examples across the Samaka in Suriname, the Garifuna, the Maya, the Kalinagu, family land, provision land. These are all practices of our peoples for many centuries, if not millennia, to hold the land together. And you've given us an example of how that can save us from capitalism and from disaster and can ensure that people's needs are met. So next we will be speaking, hearing from another defender of land from Grenada, Jane Nurse, as a sustainability consultant and works with the Grenada land actors to defend the mangroves and the people who have cared for them for many, many years. Jane, are you ready to speak?
I'm ready to speak. Thank you very much, Pambana, and also thank you much for the invitation to speak on this panel today. I'm truly excited to be here. Thank you very much also to my previous speaker, John Massenting. That was a wonderful lesson in history as well. I've learned a lot already, so I'm excited for the rest of the panel. I also want to, since it was Father's Day, I want to give a shout out to all the fathers, and I spotted my dad in the audience today. So I think without this person, without his mentorship, his love for Grenada, I probably wouldn't be where I am today doing the work that I'm doing. So I'm sure in the discussion we will hear more from him. And whatever historical bits I leave out about Grenada Dad, you can pick that up later in the discussion. Just make sure everybody else gets to talk still. Anyway, I want to speak to the situation in Grenada. It's not quite the same as in Barbuda, but I think there's some very important similarities that we can explore. And I'm going to take over the screen. Apologies if I should get kicked out. We had rains coming in since Corpus Christi, and that means my internet connection might be shaky, but I'll hope we'll get through the presentation. And I hope everybody can see. Pambana, let me know if there's any issues. Is that coming through?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, perfectly.
Perfect. Brilliant. So let's start with a quick overview of who the Grenada Land Actors are and how this organization has come about in the first place. So there have been consultations in the last 2-3 years under the umbrella of the International Land Coalition, looking at Grenada, or looking at civil society groups in Grenada and seeing how can we create a platform around. So in any case, there have been conversations with civil society in Grenada, and from that, the need arose to create a platform that looks at land governance issues. And our group has consolidated earlier this year. We are a volunteer-driven organization, and mostly a mix of professionals in Grenada, abroad, who volunteer their time from their area of expertise. So whether that is from a teaching, environmental conservation, community work, education, economics. There's a lot of different interests that have come together through this particular organization. What really galvanized action for Grenada land actors have been recent developments on the island. Grenada, similar to Barbuda, has been known as the island of spice, and more recently as we've pronounced as pure Grenada, particularly because we're still very untouched and just a beautiful island. And as was mentioned, that has drawn the eye of interested investors, especially from the Middle East and also from Asia. And I'm not sure how much you can see because somebody is trying to do artwork over the points there. And three developments that are highlighted in particular. One development that's happening in Mount Hartman, which is the Grenada Dove Bird Sanctuary. So that's our national bird. And there is a protected area there. And this area has been on the threat of development for many, many years. So the development we're seeing going ahead right there is maybe the 6th or 7th reiteration of somebody trying to come and develop there. And what we're seeing now is that, and we've seen it many times, we never really know whether a development comes through or not. Many of these developments are citizenship by investment programs. And so they will start a lot of building, or let's say they start a lot of clearing of the land, destruction in a way, and then they never finish a project because they run out of funds. And what happens, of course, in the vein of that is that either you are left with a scar in the landscape, or project may be half unfinished. And with the current development that we're seeing, the proposal was first to build in a pristine environment that features important mangroves, that features the Grenada dove. It was supposed to be a tourism development. Now it's been changed into a university or medical center idea. The next project up is the La Sagesse habitat. And that was a very beautiful, pristine, not a protected area as such, but a mangrove area that hosted a lot of different seabirds, for instance. People used to go there for fishing. It's featured a salt pond. Again, this area was given permission to be developed in a high-end luxury hotel, and the developers or subcontractors went ahead and they cleared the entire area without any regard to the mangroves or even the provisions that were given in the environmental impact assessment. And lastly, and I think one of the projects that is particularly painful is the most recent iteration of our tourism development project in La Vera, our Ramsar protected site, and which is also a leatherback turtle nesting beach. Let's see what happens if I click forward. Pambana, if I log out and come back in, do you think we can get rid of the scribbles so people can still see some of the slides?
I think that's a good idea, Jane.
Yeah, shall we try that? Okay, let me stop sharing for a second. And let me come back in. So can everybody see?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. And requests for really getting information on what is happening here. What are the environmental impact assessments saying? What kind of regulations is the developer supposed to follow? And on what grounds have permissions even been given for these type of projects? Because these are large scale developments. We talk multi-millions plowed into up to 500 rooms, per site. And Grenada generally is an island with low-key developments. The tourism sector is mostly consistent of boutique hotels. We haven't got actually beaches that are plastered from one end to the other end with hotels. And that's one of the things that we really love about Grenada, that we have access. And by law, it is anchored that the general public needs to have access to beaches, for instance. But unlike Barbuda, we do not actually have a sort of common land tenure. While we treat a lot of the lands, especially coastal strips like the commons, most of the land in Grenada, up to 90%, is actually in private ownership. And therefore regulations, guidance on how do you develop, at what point do you involve the community, are particularly important, because it is on private land. And if there is no regulations how you treat or conserve the land, then a private owner or a private individual can sell off half of a peninsula because at some point, either through family wealth, or maybe they got lucky and they bought it cheaply in the 80s or something, when land was still cheap. They own vast tracts of lands, but there is no owners on them to also be proper environmental and social stewards of the land, right? So let me see if I can press forward. There we go. So this is also just a little flowback to the Lavera site. So again, this is one of the most pristine areas up in the north of the island. You have a turtle nesting beach. Underneath, you can see the startings of the barracks for the workers that are being built. This is a Chinese developer, a Singaporean developer here. And you can see the proposal to the right-hand side that is supposed to be set up in there. And the problem obviously is with these kind of developments, they're all in the tourism sector. They're mostly come through citizenship by investment programs. And as we've seen with the COVID period, and maybe there's maybe also a link to, you know, what happened in Barbuda, while there was lockdown, a lot of this kind of clearing started taking place, and people only found out afterwards when we could sort of go out again and roam and see what was going on. And suddenly, under shock, you realize areas where you would go through for fishing, bird watching, just general relaxation, being in nature, they were suddenly gone, or the mangroves had been, you know, devastated without any word or any consultation whatsoever. And this is all in the names of creating jobs. And what we know is that these kind of tourism jobs, they're most of the time low paying. The higher management level jobs, they're usually not necessarily open to Grenada. Unless the developer has a foot in Grenada as a Grenadian or living here, their interest often is also not in running the hotels. And so the jobs argument is used in our poor communities, particularly in those rural areas, to say, well, you know, give up the land that you've used to, you know, cultivate or utilize for your livelihoods in exchange for 1,000, 1,500, maybe if you're lucky, 2,000 EC. That's not even enough to, you know, qualify to pay taxes and contribute back to the country. So this is for that kind of level of jobs that we're selling out essentially our lands. And as COVID has also demonstrated, the tourism sector is vulnerable. I used to work in the tourism sector, so I'm not anti-tourism, but you see businesses, small-scale business, they just crumbled, right? And so if anything we should have learned out of this crisis is that we need to diversify our economy versus putting more eggs into the same basket of just tourism developments, especially high-end luxury tourist resorts where guests would come and they stay only in those developments, but they hardly even venture out and spend their money in the economy. That's not the kind of guests or tourists that we want for the kind of product that Grenada has to offer. And so it's a total mismatch between what the needs are of the community in terms of long-term sustainable jobs that lift people out of poverty, environmental conservation, and essentially actually degrading the very product that we're selling to the world, and also only selling to the world, not recognizing that we as Grenadians have a right to a pristine, beautiful, untouched environment for our livelihoods, for our healing, for our mental and physical well-being, and for the ecological operations of just living on an island, because as we said earlier on, resources are finite. And with that realization and also upset and pain over losing these spaces that we've traditionally used to, even though they're mostly under private ownership, that must be said, Grenada land actors got together with concerned citizens. We collaborated with Birds of the Caribbean, trying to bring attention to these developments. We've served a petition on the government for which we are yet to hear a response, but we gathered over 6,000 signatures locally and regionally. And after our sort of futile steps of trying to engage with the developers and trying to create a bridge of communication between the community, the developer, and the government, and asking difficult questions that we would get only unsatisfactory answers to or none whatsoever, we've then decided to go the legal route and file for a judicial review. And we will have our first hearing this week, actually on Thursday. So I wish I could say or speak in more detail about the case, but because it is in proceedings at the moment, I'm a little bit tongue-tied here, so I can only speak in general terms and I can't go into details. But I think it's really important that we use all avenues that are available to us, whether it's communication, whether it's media, whether it's negotiation, but also the legal options. And what we've realized in Grenada, unfortunately, is that that kind of asking for transparency and accountability, whilst a simple right any citizen should be able to enforce and to ask for, it is something that we almost have to fight for, or that people are afraid to speak up and afraid to come forward for fear of repercussions, intimidation, harassment. And the common concern, or the concern for our common environment and the livelihoods that are linked to it, isn't seen as an asset. It is seen as a threat, obviously. You know, we can go further into discussion as why that is. But the main aim really, and this is also why I wouldn't single out one developer or one development, is that there is a pattern. There's a pattern of non-compliance. There's a pattern on different levels. And I think there's responsibility on all stakeholders. As the government, it is the responsibility to safeguard the public interest, follow the laws, implement regulations, especially around environmental and social protection. As a developer, it is important to engage with communities early on. And I don't think that all developers are horrible, the private sector is horrible, but there need to be clear guidelines and they need to be held to it. And from a community's perspective, or as a general public in Grenada, and I can't speak to the other islands here, I can only speak to what we've experienced here, there's responsibility on our end to educate ourselves and share the knowledge of ecosystem values.
We do have to go on to the next speaker, but thank you for laying out so clearly a particular issue and the patterns of development that is not for the people, and that's pushed through during crisis, during disaster, that relies on people to be economically precarious so that they sign on to jobs that are not dignified, that are not well paid, and that destroy the environment. And thank you for sharing some of the tactics, not just of the rich and powerful, but also of the people and the work you all are doing in terms of consultation, the importance of the popular voice, your paths to mapping, showing beautiful photos that we'll share with everyone after this presentation. Apologies for the interruption. Your petitions, the judicial and court path, as well as a mass political, public, popular education campaign to let people know what's going on and the incredible wealth that you have cared for all of these years and the risks against it. So next we are turning to Edgar J. Stefanas in Old Providence and Santa Catalina Islands, where the people have also been engaged in massive political education, as well as forming organized structures. Many people will know that Colombia is in an incredible moment of mass uprisings and mobilizations against military occupation, thanks in large part to the United States financing, and also a local elite that's Euro descendant and hires death squads to carry out horrific acts in defense of military aggression and corporations. But the people there have been turning these mass mobilizations into organizations and structures, assemblies with very deep collective decision-making and processes to build power from below. So next, Edgar J., are you with us to speak? So many lessons from these islands.
We're going to pass a video from Edgar. Oscar, please.
Okay, give me a moment. I show you.
This is the Dignity Camp, the Diaspora Hall, where the Federation of Fishermen from Providencia-Colombia organize all the events and keep up the process of organization of the community to reject the project from the military station. This is my companion here from the Dignity Camp, socializing. This is the military base right side of the Dignity Camp. This is the project that the fishermen from Providencia-Colombia rejecting and pronouncing against, because it invades the ecosystem from the mangroves and from the gully from both. These are going to the to where we had the dock from the fisherman farm, the Cook Fish and Farm that the hurricane destroyed. See, this is the place we had our dock. And down to the bottom you can see the dock from the military there. And you can see the military camp, the Coast Guard camp. And you right upside of this you can see the installation from the Cook that the hurricane destroyed. So that is what we are rejecting. A project from militarization of the island that affect the interest from the racial fisherman from Providencia-Colombia. You can see the whole stop that the hurricane destroyed. The camp is a expression of organization from the racial fishermen from Providencia-Colombia that mobilizing our interests against the Colombian interests and creating union between the different actors of our community to reject the position from the government and to make an exercise of self-determination, self-government and self-justice, and creating also what organization from fishermen that name part of the organization that named the Racial Guard with a mission to protect the rights of expression from the racial people, protect the environment, to protect our human rights, and to protect our project like Federation of Fishermen, and reject, be the first line of protection and rejection of the project from the Coast Guard, illegal Coast Guard station that they installed beside the fisherman co-op. We all building from the Federation and from the Dignity Camp, we are building a process of union from our community and making a call to structure our one way of living and recover our food independence to can build a community that prosper and that find is one way in this process and clearing the way for the future generation. That is all. The militarization of the island, starting with the excuse that there was helping clean the island, and then took the principal structure from where you had college, school, sport structure, and a public structure, and they set up their tents and them install what illegal Coast Guard station and right beside of the installation from the Fish and Farm Co-op. That is one of the 4 organizations of fishermen and fisherwomen that can farm the Federation of Fishermen from Providencia-Colombia. We are rejecting this process, and we have 102 days since we installed the Dignity Camp to protest and to mobilize the fishermen and the community against this project and against the project of the process of militarization from the island that intimidating our people and imposing the plan that the national government have here without consult our needs and our interests. The affectation from our communities from natural disaster, that is something that can happen in our living, is common in our history. But what happened that the Colombian system using the disaster to apply a policy of penetration that they had built from 1912 with a national law that harder to colonize our territory. The natural disaster that happened in November from 2020 caused a big movement of militarization and official actors from the Colombian government that invade our territory with the excuse that they're going to rebuild it. The national law from rebuilding, the 1523, established a method and a view of applying a process of rebuilding that they are not respecting and not doing well. The process doing with several mistakes that today that we got 7 months after the hurricane and we only got two new house built and almost 600 houses rebuilt, and the house top do comply with the international requirement from hurricane proof because none of them do got the hurricane strap. So the disaster, the natural disaster, I insist that using as an excuse to apply a method of neo-colonization to take away the territory from the racial people and impose the interest from the richest people in Colombia. The capitalist system is a system that getting old and in almost 200 years applying systematically in the world. Up to this date, it don't serve the principal needs from the communities in the world, from the population of the planet. To the contrary, it is a system that destroys the environment, enriching a small group of people and pouring the majority. And the ethnic groups that spread through the whole world and especially in the Caribbean, the racial people from the Caribbean being affected drastically by the international capitalism, because the international capitalism basing on the production of riches concern a small group of people and exclude the big majority.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for putting that video of Edgar J.
Thank you, Pamela.
We will pass on to Pamela González.
Saludos a todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Thank you. Greetings to all the brothers and sisters. Thank you for the opportunity to have us here to tell the case of Vieques. I'm really touched and inspired by all the stories from our fellow Caribbean countries fighting and struggling after hurricanes Irma and Maria. But we have a saying, el desastre no es natural, es político. So the disaster is not so much natural, it's political. Rico is an archipiélago. Vieques significa isla pequeña en el taíno, and another gem of the Caribbean. There we see the island of Vieques. With respect to Puerto Rico, it's to the east about 10 kilometers. It's 7.2 kilometers wide and 32 kilometers in length, belonging to the archipelago of Puerto Rico, and our closeness to the other islands, the Leeward Islands. There's certainly a lot of connection between Vieques and St. Croix, where a lot of Viequenses migrated after the Navy expropriated 2/3 of our territory. And in 2010, there were about 9,000 inhabitants of Vieques. Now in the 2020 census, we're at 8,300, so lost about 1,000 residents. Vieques has the largest wildlife refuge of the Caribbean. However, this is a difficult subject because after the Navy ended the military practices, most of the land on the eastern side and also on the western side became changed hands into another United States agency, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. And although their purpose is so-called conservancy and protection, it's really seen by the population as not having control over the land that was taken and expropriated from us, and no community participation in the decisions, no access really after certain hours. So we have no input into the future of these lands, and it's a cause for struggle and resistance as well. We have a lot of very highly productive systems, mangroves and wetlands, same as the presenter before, speaking about the importance of this for protection and for sustainability, for clean water and for farming. And of the few bioluminescent bays in the world, Bahia Mosquito in the southern shore is the most active, and it's a real asset that we have geologically. And this will be disputed by some of our fellow islands here, but we do have a very rich archaeological history and past that we have to claim and relearn. And after the military ceased the bombardments and the military practices, we have demanded the 4 Ds: demilitarization, decontamination, return of the land, and sustainable development or adequate planning with community-based approaches, as the presenter from Grenada was mentioning. And we are currently fighting for such Vieques because this has caused profound wounds, deep wounds in the land, in the people. And now we are, and even before the hurricanes, which we know only did expose and aggravated and accelerated the very inequalities that existed before the natural disasters. Puerto Rico is under the Fiscal Control Supervision Board, the Puerto Rico Oversight Fiscal Board, and commonly known as La Junta. And even before 2017, when Irma and Maria struck, almost a decade before, in 2009 and 10, they were already paving the way to privatize essential services. The law was created, the authority for public-private partnerships that made it so that normal procurement practices and standards in different public agencies would not need to be followed. Everything was treated as confidential, and no access to who was selected, what was the design, the request for proposals. And currently we are seeing the effects of that with 2 essential services, the electrical grid in Puerto Rico being privatized, and in the case of Vieques, the maritime transportation, the ferry that connects us to Puerto Rico and to Culebra are being placed into private hands. And I say privatized because they say it's a public-private partnership, but unlike a typical PPP where there's some risk and some investment by the private operator, there is no risk here. These contracts are made so that they're just simply given the assets of the government to manage and administer and really operate for profit. We are resisting that in Vieques because we know the contract does not serve the needs of the citizens for transportation, which is our lifeline. There is no hospital in Vieques. After the hurricanes, it was left vacant. And so only we have a small refuge that's acting as an emergency room, but really no major emergencies can be treated there. And sadly, we have had 2 children die in the last year because they could not get the necessary treatment here in the island of Vieques. So what's happening is that on the one hand, we have these austerity measures, and I was mentioning the laws prior to the hurricanes. There were also laws to dismantle the workers' rights, to eliminate worker benefits, to eliminate the unions, and that's another reason why this privatization of the electrical grid also has a dual purpose of combatant labor union in Puerto Rico, the UTIER, and at the same time they are remapping, rezoning the land so that people who lived in coastal areas for a long time are now being told that this is flood areas, and that they have to move away from it and be relocated without really giving any possibility for these communities to devise solutions or to deal with the situation and be given the resources to act. While in other areas, they're same in the maritime coast being granted permits to build luxury hotels. So the zoning laws, planning board, the privatization measures, lack of worker rights are all part of the recipe. And Puerto Rico has been seen as an enclave, an economical enclave, primarily controlled by United States capital. So we have in Vieques this influx, and in Puerto Rico too, because of tax incentives of the very, very rich, the 1%, the very high net worth people that are being given all kinds of benefits simply for moving to Puerto Rico on a more than 6 months a year. So they enjoy incredible tax benefits, and they don't have to pay taxes really in the US or in Puerto Rico. Corporations are subject to a 4% tax only. And really, they're not really giving to the community or engaging with the community, but are creating their own separate utopia, as the crypto youth is trying to make with their own schools, their own gated communities. And this happens too in Vieques. So we have to talk about the large mansions and vacation rentals that have proliferated, as well as the smaller Airbnbs. And my friend Kathy Gannett, who's in the audience, has some numbers that she can share with us with respect to the astronomical number of vacation rentals in Vieques for such a small island. But we also have a large population of middle-class retirees who own a home in the United States, but they build second homes in Vieques and escape the winters and come live here. And they don't really interact with the local population, or very limited interaction or respect for the culture, the history. This is
just one more minute.
Okay, so we have to redefine strategies for how to resist and defend. We have repression laws as well. Right now, we have 3 young people being prosecuted for essentially protesting the lack of a ferry system, which was left to deteriorate and not work as an excuse to then privatize it. And whenever we denounce, we are faced with violent repression from the state. But I would like to end with a victory, because there in Rincon, Puerto Rico, you can see in this photo, this condominium was trying to build a pool, a swimming pool. Look how close to the water. And people have resisted and set up a camp, and even one of them arrested for trespassing and denouncing this. But finally, the headline of the story is that the Department of Natural Resources paralyzed the construction because it invades the separation from the beach. So there are instances where we can see progress and unification of people to defend the land. And
Thank you so much, Pamela. Venceremos, the people will overcome. You shared 4 concrete points on demilitarization, decontamination, the return of lands, and sustainable development, all forwarded by the people, workers' rights, children live and don't get sick where there are no hospitals, that the earth is protected, that development is centered primarily on the well-being of the majority of people, food, housing, no war, military bases, and workers' rights and public education. It's an incredible fight, and we are with you. Next, also a land of incredible union organizing, particularly in the last few months, and if not decades, is Sister Yaya Marin Coleman, chairperson of the Library of African and Indigenous Studies and the United Black Association for Development Education Fund.
Greetings, thanks, Pambana. Pambana has organized for an extended period of time in Belize. She's a solidarity sister. Respect to our ancestors, African ancestors who were kidnapped and enslaved, and those in Belize who identify as their children. Solidarity to our sisters and brothers who are here in Belize, who I see as a part of this webinar, and those in the diaspora, Mexico and the US in particular, our sisters and brothers here with us globally. Respect. I'm a little nervous because this is my first time presenting in this capacity, so bear with me. Belize is land of Central America on the east coast, bounded by the Caribbean Sea. This particular development, the person that you're seeing right now on the screen is a British Belizean businessman and the former chairman of the Conservative Tory Party in the UK. He has many businesses, and one of them is the Waterloo Investment Holding Limited, which is the company for the Port of Belize and construction of a cruise terminal and cruise tourism village in the Port of Belize Limited. No, that's smack dab in Southside Belize City. It's not I wish I could have enlarged the image, but the image you're seeing, thank you, person, is showing you the proposed area of this development. Now, the buildings you're seeing to the back of the green area and coming to the right is the Port Laola community. Now, further to the bottom right that you're not seeing, there's a proposal to expand further into the Yarborough community. The Yarborough community and the Port Laola community is predominantly working class people. And a lot of those people, a number of them work at the Port of Belize Limited. And so the immediate impact like COVID-19, which would be considered a disaster, is debatable if it's natural or not. The Port of Belize Limited proposed a 10% salary cut for some of the employees of the Port of Belize Limited who are represented by the Christian Workers Union. The workers represented by the Christian Workers Union pushed back to say, before we agree to a 10% salary cut, we need to see your financial records to see if indeed COVID-19 has impacted you the way you said it has. The image you're seeing right now and that is an image of the port pier being extended and then the community immediately next to the Belize port. And the workers started to strike because they did not agree with the 10% salary cut. During their strike, they received a text one day, this will be on July 22nd, 2020, saying that 36 of the employees were terminated. They were protesting, sitting down peacefully on the compound of the Port of Belize Limited when a paramilitary arm of the Belize Police Department, known as the Gang Suppression Unit, attacked them with rubber bullets and with tear gas. One of the employees, Trevor Jones, was unconscious, and I'm cautioning you that that shot is going to come up next. He was shot and he was unconscious. And this is to say that Belizean people have not accepted disaster capitalism sitting down. We have consistently, these are primarily Black workers, they've pushed back against this system, COVID-19 as well. The Christian workers won a CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, after fighting for it for 16 years. So one of the actors would be the developer and the Port of Belize Limited. The next actor I'm looking at right now would be the non-governmental organization, primarily environmental organization, Belize, pushing back on the proposed development. One of their pushback was that the laws of Belize needs to be looked at and changed because the laws do not permit Belizean people who are very important in this conversation to be actively a part of the discussion and the policy. So one of the things as a community organizer that I'm doing, I'm working with credible community organizers in the Port Lawala community to ensure that there's consciousness raising around this particular issue about this proposed development and how it may impact that community. Public service announcements, we need to have community dialogues, and we need to lobby to have a community representative on the National Environmental Appraisal Committee, the NEAC committee. And what you're seeing is the legislation that's telling you for any community representation. And so, and looking back at the NGOs are, the environmental NGOs are problematic. I'd like to look at an article by Arundhati Roy from September 23rd, 2014, NGOization of Resistance in the Pambazuki News, which states that oftentimes NGO appear to be the, like they're looking out for the environment, but the most important resource, which are the people, there's a clear disconnection between the NGO and the people in the community from sources that at times support infrastructural adjustment of countries. And so really they tend to buffer between the government and the people. And so I'm holding the NGOs accountable for being more actively involved. And I've approached several of them and they told me their funders are giving important for us to learn more about seeking funding and getting ourselves as Belizean, as community members, more informed. Now, one of the things that I found out that I didn't know before is that Belize signed an agreement. It's the first of an agreement of its kind. It's called the Escaso Agreement. And this Escaso Agreement enters into force in Latin America and the Caribbean, was entered into force on International Mother Earth Day. And it was done by ECLA, the UN Regional Commission in charge of the ECASO. Belize has signed to organize around the ratification of that. And let me share, there it is, the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. So oftentimes, the people in these communities who are not organized, who do not have the information, who do not have the resources, again, we are not a part of the policy-making process or the decision-making when it comes to proposed development. In an article by, I believe the organization is called PARCO. It was a position statement on universities and reparative justice program. And what I liked about what PARCO said is they made mention of the ESOC, of the Escaso Agreement. And I'd just like to quote some of the things that were said in that position paper quickly. It says that members, community that affect their lives and the environment and access to justice in environmental matters, and that what this agreement does, the Escaso Agreement, it places citizen action and environmental defenders at the center, recognizing the rights of those who have traditionally been underrepresented, excluded, or marginalized. And this contributes to the fulfillment of primary actors. There will be the people of Belize, the government of Belize, the developer, and the non-governmental organizations, the environmental organizations. The laws of Belize does not create a space for the Belizean people to actively participate in policy and decision-making when it comes to proposed development in their communities, where this proposal is being pitched for, to ensure that those community leaders understand what this development is about, and that we then canvass the community to see how many people actually go back and check and see if the people understand the gravity of what's going to happen, and find out from the community how they want to participate, what do they want for their community as it relates to this proposed development. And then we also lobby the government for community members to have a say in what happens, because the NEAC is what determines if the EIA, the environmental impact assessment, will be approved or denied. At the same time, we're going to lobby to hold government accountable to ratify the 2020. In April of 2021, Belize signed the Escaso Agreement, but has not ratified it. And so I'm really appreciative of listening to others to find out what people's strategies and tactics are. And I want to, from the article by Arundhati Roy, there's a quote that says, real resistance has real consequences and no salaries. And for the people who oftentimes you don't see their faces, and I want to salute the community leaders in Port Laola in particular, the ones that I'm working with. And these are people who have a wealth of knowledge. They've worked on political campaigns, they've worked with independent organizations. They know their communities in a way that I would not know. Even though I live, work, and spend my money in Southside Belize City, I don't live in the Port Laola community. And so oftentimes I say to people, when you're going into communities to work, look for the credible community leaders and give them the respect that they are due for the work that they're doing. They may not have any certification or degrees, but the knowledge that they have from living for generations in these communities are equal to someone with a PhD, and the respect is due to these people, the same respect. And so I'm doing my utmost best because it's my responsibility to represent those community leaders and those people in the Port Laola community. And it's absolutely on the Belizean people to take the individual responsibility to become informed about these community actions. I want to say before I leave, to
Thank
just
you
show
so
this.
much, Yaya. Last point.
Thanks. Yes, I want to acknowledge two of our a brother and a sister, Sister Candy Gonzalez and George Gonzalez, who created the Stand Up, Speak Up Guide to Public Participation in Belize. This stuff they've since transitioned, but they put in absolutely a lot of work so that we can learn as Belizeans how to actively participate in our best interests in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Yaya, for grounding us in the importance of organized labor, the importance of the voice of the people and our participation in our democratic process and in our lives. Thanks for pointing us to some victories, as Sis Pamela did. It's really important to remember that not only must we win, but we can win. And for reminding us that Blackness in the Caribbean is not simply the bodies that we're in. It is much about our heritage, our ancestry, as well as a politics that is decidedly anti-colonial, anti-imperial, and for the benefit of the majorities. And thank you for pointing us to the importance of mapping out our communities and who has power where, and being sure that it's the people who work the land, it's the people who work at the ports who have the most power when we're organized and we resist. And as you said, Belize is always and forever important in my heart. I spent much of my 20s there, and it very much shaped my understanding of the Caribbean as central in the global South and the fight. So next, another place where I lived, Jamaica, and was shaped at the University of the West Indies. A big shout out to Dr. Northover, one of my lecturers, as I pursued studies on collective land tenure and reparations at the Salisis Institute at the University of the West Indies. And next we have Hugh Johnson, whose official position is Public Relations Officer. He is also a farmer, an advocate, and part of the Bernard Lodge Farmers Group, which has been essential in pushing forward development that focuses primarily on feeding the people and not enriching the few. Hugh Johnson, are you with us to speak? I pass the mic. And brother, if you could unmute, please.
Thank you, Pambana. Are you hearing me? Thank you.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Thank you. I'm here to join in the cadre of speakers to look on the issues that are affecting us severely in this region. And listening to the previous speakers, I realized that we have common challenges. It's just that they are probably sometimes of different shades, but all end up marginalizing the indigenous people, the smallholders, and our security. So have so much to say that I'm not sure the time allotted will do justice to it, but I'll try nonetheless to bring you up to speed with what is happening here to the smallholders and what is threatening our water security, food security, and climate change challenges. Many years ago, the government of Jamaica had decided to convert one of the most fertile and best irrigated land mass in Jamaica into development, housing development, and commercial enterprise. That parcel of land that they had over 250 small farmers holding plots of 30 acres, 50 acres, down to 5 acres, that we were putting out hundreds of tons of agricultural produce to take care of the food need or the food security issue of two of our largest areas in the country, and that is Kingston and St. Catherine, Portmore. A group of us as farmers, and we approached the then government, and they relent on their, they backtrack on their plan to do just that. With the support of the National Environmental Protection Agency, who was deeply against such a development, and the Water Resources Authority, who warned against covering that mass of land that would recharge the aquifer that supplies. And we thought it was over until a new government came into office, and not only were they looking on implementing that plan, but they had expanded it to a wider area, about 3-4 times the size that the previous administration was planning to do. So we, as the farmers group, we got together, formed an organization, and we started to lobby these agencies. When we realized that they were adamant, because all of the discussion we have had and all the participants, we were on one accord as it relates to that plan is not good for the environment, it's not good for our food security, but they were still going ahead. So we were of the opinion and the impression that they were coming to their decision on matters unknown to us or not by sound objective reasoning. We further went to the Prime Minister, and he came, met with us on site, and he assured us that he'll do all that lies in his power to address the situation. In addressing the situation, what they have decided to do is to find a spot to put the 200 and odd farmers that were on that spot of land somewhere else, which less desirable soil for farming. So we again enter into discussion, dialogue, and even some resistance in pointing out those ills and the welfare of the farmers. We realized, though, that the persons who they were giving these lands to for this massive development were corporate giants, and they are doing it in the name of development. So we are at a junction now where it is obvious that they are not relenting in their effort to plant concrete on one of the most fertile, best irrigated land in the country. So we are looking to re-engage some partners, and I'm happy for this program that can highlight such atrocities and unjust action of administrations to reach out to international bodies like UN, ICHR, or even as far as the International Court of Justice. And we at this juncture are engaging expertise to help guide the process in that regard. Because as for me, as a farmer, from October last year, I've not planted anything on that 30 acres of farmland that I have been growing on for the last 15 years because of this unrest. I'm out of pocket, I'm losing, but it is of no concern to anybody as it relates to the interest of the conglomerate and corporate entities that see this as a windfall for them to put some houses on and make some millions for themselves. So I just want to share this as what is happening on the ground. We have gone ahead and we have done a documentary, which I was tempted to run it here, but time would not allow us to. And that in and of itself will explain some of the challenges faced by the farmers and the displacement that it has caused, upheaval, death, sickness, and distress to thousands of families. And they seem not to be able to understand the magnitude of their action on the populace. So I just want to thank you for allowing me to express these concerns and to let this august body understand the challenges that we face from a day-to-day basis as it relates to governmental policy and the interests of only a few to the disadvantage of the masses and the country on the whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those succinct and salient points. Thank you to all of the speakers today. We are now transitioning into the section on questions and answers, and certainly some of your closing remarks in the interest of time, and in case there were things you didn't have an opportunity to cover. So this will be the first time I've moderated with questions coming from the audience. Are people familiar with doing a reaction to raise your hand so that we can call on you to ask a question? It's in the bottom. There's participants, chat, share screen, record, and reactions. And we will do our best to ensure that questions are posed to everyone so they have an opportunity to speak. So far in the chat, there have been many comments around seed sovereignty, around demilitarizing our region, around the importance of the reparations question covering a change in land tenure across our lands that have been colonized, the importance of union and organized labor in the fight, grassroots communications. We had a taste of the invasions of patriarchal and invasive media makers on our channel today. Are there any questions from the audience to particular speakers? No, not yet. Okay. What I think we should do is turn to our speakers again and ask you to be even more succinct with incredible apologies. We know that you speak from deep collective decision makings and from long struggles, but we'll just do 2 minutes for each speaker. And if it is that a question arises specifically for you in the chat, I will let you know. And Dwayne, would you mind adding your question to the chat? And as we've started this new process, I will ask us to go in the order in which you all spoke. I'm starting with Mr. Mussington, educator and advocate of collective land tenure and the people of Barbuda. Could you please share for 2 minutes some thoughts that you've had that you would like the audience to hear?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Brother John. The connection is not so good.
Is the similarity of Okay.
Is it possible for you to move to the location with better Wi-Fi? Is it? Okay,
Then
maybe
I've turned off my video.
that sounds great. Thanks
Okay,
so
are you
much.
hearing me any better? Okay, great. Yes, what I was saying is that I'm listening to many of the other speakers. There is a common trend that is across the region. One thing I would like to point out is the fact that most of these encroachments have to do with protected areas. So for example, in Barbuda, the area which is targeted right now is in fact a Ramsar site. It is a national park and it's also Antigua and Barbuda's only designated Ramsar site. And it's really disturbing to see in these small islands, wetlands and these natural areas are our greatest assets in terms of our ability to adapt to the climate crisis. Yet these are the areas which are targeted by these quote unquote sorts of development. And it's ironic in the sense that our economies are driven, at least in the small islands, by tourism as the major sector. We have signed on to the Paris Agreement in terms of making a claim internationally that we are not the ones who are responsible for the climate crisis. So we need assistance from those responsible to get us through. Now, one of the things, the obligations we have is that we have to make an undertaking that we will not put our critical economic sectors at risk in these areas which are going to be vulnerable to the climate crisis. So when we engage in these developments that basically take out our wetlands, take out our protected areas, those key areas that are going to assist us to adapt, I find it's very hypocritical. And that is the main trend we're seeing in these developments, which are running on the backs of quote unquote disasters. So they're non-sustainable, and at the same time, they're basically killing us. It's our death sentence in terms of our ability to resist. So that's what I would want to add briefly to the discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll now pass the word to Jane Nurse.
Thank you again. And I have to say, I 110% second what Mr. Mossington has said. I'd like to add, and also thank you again to all the presenters. There are so many important points, and I don't think I'll be able to go into all of them, but I think Sister Yaya had made some really excellent pointers, especially with regards, for instance, to the Escazú Agreement and highlighting the role of public participation in development. And this is, I think, also a pattern we see throughout the region and in these projects, that public participation is constantly either undercut, not engaged in with, or if at all, it's a rubber stamp exercise. And I think this is where the role, and that's very good reminder, the critical role of NGOs comes in, because oftentimes you get a consultation, you invite the 3 NGOs that are always invited to all the workshops, and then you say, we've done our community consultation, and you move on. And I think this is something what we really have to challenge. And I think this is also why it's very important to become technical, why it's important to become legal, why it's important to build a bridge between what's happening in the community, but also strategizing how you get those voices back into the policy framework. And I think that is something where we have lots of expertise, but I can see within our context, we don't have enough coordination. And the sad thing is, particularly in small island states where Grenada has, what, 110,000 inhabitants, we don't have paid activists, we don't have the luxury of anonymity or like large, corporations or even funding or any kind of administrative structure behind us. Oftentimes it's individuals who stand up and who take the personal risk, who have to have the courage to speak up and face the repercussions. And I think the NGO space here has to become a vehicle to allow people to speak up and find their rightful space in these sort of development practices. And I see for us a huge amount of work that needs to be done. There is I'm learning a lot from the other speakers that I've been hearing. I want to reach out to everyone and find out a few more strategies as to how you get your communities to speak up and their voices to be heard. And also, how do we mitigate risk for the individuals? That's been our biggest challenge here, because people are angry, but then once they have the opportunity to do something about it, we are still afraid that somebody is going to clamp down on, you know, our livelihood in one form, shape, or the other. And sort of this environment of intimidation and bullying and harassment, I think is something that is what keeps people from also doing more. So that being said, I want to thank everyone again for their contributions, and from Grenada, warm greetings. We are the island of revolution after all, to some extent as well. So we hope that we can bring revolution not just in physical forms, but I think the revolution now, and I'm speaking maybe to millennial cohort in this group, is we also have to come with more solutions. We have to do more homework. We can't just complain about things, but we have to say, this is how we want this development to look like. This is the steps that we want to happen. And I think it's not guaranteed that it will listen to us, but I do think that being educated and knowledgeable on our community needs and on the processes of governance, that is really important to bridge at this point in time. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Forward ever. Next, just a note that we'll be sure to share with everyone, including on the Facebook, the video from Old Providence and Santa Catalina Islands from Edgar J. Next, I will pass the mic to Pamela Gonzalez in Vieques.
Muchas gracias. In closing, this has been incredibly eye-opening and inspirational for me. Thank you again to all of you. And I turn to the words of Rafael Cancén Miranda. He is one whom, along Dolores Lebron, known as Lolita Lebron, our heroine, and two others, went to Congress in 1954 and denounced the colonial status of Puerto Rico by drawing attention at the House of Representatives and shooting in the air. So he writes, "Let us not be fooled, because lies neutralize and even can turn us into enemies of each other." So I think it's very important to denounce and call it what it is. Call that what's happening in our lands is neocolonialism, is a disaster capitalism, and also the duty that we have in not being fooled to share our common histories and also research and investigate other instances that are occurring around of neighbors. And then he writes, "Let us know well the enemy, to whom many times we cannot see their face, and let us know ourselves very well." So knowing the enemy, there are some enemies that are clear, like capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, but there are other lesser known enemies, and some that are not enemies, but are not friends yet. And I would like to say that perhaps with a little bit of heart and example and showing what we're doing right now, we can win them over to our side and form alliances and coalitions and grow our ranks. And so this is important to know ourselves really well. Let us maintain our pride high, because history demands it. So incredibly proud of our Black and Indigenous roots and ancestry and ways that we are returning to, with compassion for each other and compassion for the land. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Y pa'lante. Next, Sister Yaya Marin Coleman in Belize.
Greetings. Thanks everyone for sharing honestly and truthfully, and for having the courage for this being your way of life. We do understand it's at a great sacrifice. At this point, I would really, really want to acknowledge the collaboration with the University of Bristol and the 5 countries and grassroots organization for the research development grant as it relates to food insecurity at the time of climate change, sharing and learning from bottom-up responses in the Caribbean region. This is an absolutely amazing model, because it's giving grassroots people, working class people, everyday people, who are often the ones who are suffering, whose voices are not represented, who are not seen or heard, on whose backs these enslavers, these colonizers, these capitalists continue to suck our marrow from, that there's a space for us to connect across borders and create a model that, to my knowledge, has never been done. It's a great responsibility as an organizer. It's a major weight to carry when you speak on behalf of other people. So I want people to pay attention to this particular model, to offer solidarity, to the fact that we have people who are professionals, lawyers, scientists, researchers, academians at the ready for us as everyday working class people just carries a lot of weight for me. So thank you for that collaboration and for the opportunity for us to connect as people of color across borders.
Thank you so much. I will next pass the mic to Brother Hugh Johnson in Jamaica. And afterwards, I will ask if some questions or comments have emerged.
Thank you, Pambana. I must say that I'm honored to be here in this group. But I would like to say here that I'm happy for the collaboration. I'm happy for the thought process that has gone into the whole coming together of this group, because it's not just individual countries. As the scripture says, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and power of darkness in high places. There is a concerted effort on our part to reverse the evil of the past. Each of us, this, don't see it as not for the, please don't look on it not for the great significance that is whole for the liberation of a people. So if all of us should see ourselves as a link in this chain to change the trajectory of the race, each of us should pledge that if I'm a link in the chain will never break where I stand. And if we do that and we are committed to the cause, comes what may, through to the end. And I'll say here that if we envision the end game, the end goal of being successful, that our brothers and sisters that are being taken advantage of at this juncture, 50, 100 years from now, will be able to have a better life for their children and grandchildren. None of the challenges that come our way now will deter us from being steadfast to achieve our objective. I pray that we may continue to hold each other's hands as we move forward to achieve our stated objective. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the participants today for sharing your wisdoms and your processes, your tactics to recuperate power for the people who work the land, who fish, the teachers, the media makers from the grassroots, and the majorities who currently are suffering, but as shared earlier, refuse and will resist and fight back. And the task at hand is to learn from our ancestors how to do so together, to build internationalism, cooperation, and a united front against disaster capitalism and the legacies and ongoing oppressions of colonial powers, particularly across the Caribbean. There are many, many debts that are yet to be paid. And certainly, no region in the world will be free until Africa is free, until we have no more wars, sanctions, and oppression of the majorities. We had some comments in the chat box. We'll make sure to copy them all down so that we can share them on the Facebook page and more broadly. I believe that people who've signed in, we now have a way to be in touch with you more readily. And on that note, I think we are closing off. If anybody would like to chime in with some last words, I certainly would like to. Oh, sorry. I certainly would like to say, let us end the blockade against Cuba. That's one piece. I think I heard Dr. Northover.
Sorry to interrupt you, Pambama. Greetings, everyone. I just wanted to say that I had put a question in the chat to John. Just wanted to congratulate everyone. It's really been a feast in terms of the activism and the knowledge that was shared here. The islands have been enclosed by colonial and neo-colonial practices for a very, very long time. And I just want to applaud the courage that each person has in taking the fight to those who are trying to dispossess and alienate, and in some cases even disappear. So it's a very, very difficult struggle, but I think this is a good step in terms of aligning our interests and cooperating to get the word out there. And as one of the participants in the chat said, Dr. Kevin Riney, there's a discourse out there about the green economy, sustainable development, resilience, adaptation, and all of this discourse is being used to mask these predatory and extractive politics of development. So we need to be able to support our counter discourses and link that into the community mobilization that Yaya emphasized, the need for authentic voices to be heard, alongside those people who are willing through the NGOs and through the universities, such as University of West Indies or the University of Bristol or others, that have the institutional capacity to do a little bit more than someone who is really not resourced to push the agenda as much as an organization could. So it's really a joined up work, but I think the fact that we are continuing the fight it didn't begin with this discussion, and it won't end here, but the fact is that Hurricane Irma and Maria, and then the cataclysm of COVID-19, it's been disaster after disaster in the Caribbean. So we really need to be able to see the ways in which disaster is mobilized to negative interests, to undermine the futures of our populations, and to really completely rob us of our heritage, the land, the resources, the air, the water, the capacities to have sustainable livelihoods. It's an outrage, it's unholy, and I, for one, I'm willing to continue to fight with everyone else to push this agenda. So, but I didn't mean to talk for that amount of time. I just really wanted to say that there was a question I had for John. And by the way, for disclosure, I'm at the University of the West Indies and a part of the Bristol project. The Global Challenges Research Fund Food Insecurity Project.
Thank you so much, Dr. Northover. I think if people are able to stay, you can go ahead and ask your question. And I also see a hand raised from Raymond Nurse, who I think maybe got a shout out from Jane, and so maybe her father. I myself have to go, so I'll pass the moderating mic to Line and give so many thanks, and may the struggle continue.
Before you leave Pambana, I would like to say thank you to Pambana and everyone else behind the scenes who made it possible. I know it was a great sacrifice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. May the ancestors be with you as you move around.
Thank you. So Line, if you could take on the mic and invite Dr. Northover, go ahead. Such brilliance from the Caribbean. I appreciate you greatly.
Thank you, Pambana. Thank you. Okay, let's just have a few more minutes. I know everyone is very busy. We have to go, but indeed, I would like to give the word to Raymond Nurse for a last question, maybe.
Your mic is mute, Raymond.
Okay. I guess I tried to unmute it. Is this could you hear me now?
Yes,
Hello? You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, guys. Anytime I talk about issues of a broad nature like this, I always feel that I cannot get left off, but I feel that I need to intrude into the speaking arena to just show by after listening to those wonderful presentations that were all cutting edges against each other. And I would like to share my experience about Caribbean, my passion and love for the Caribbean. So, we look at the Caribbean and the origin of the Caribbean. If we really understand the Caribbean, then from the north of the Caribbean, especially the islands of the Caribbean, from the north all the way from Sabre to Grenada, the last in the south of this archipelago, these chains of islands, we would recognize that we have one basic thing in common, which could either be our curse or which could be our blessing. And this curse or this blessing started million years ago. Million years would sound very much to any normal human being, but as a geologist, 45 million years, which our Caribbean islands have started developing, is a baby with respect to geological time frame, which goes all the way from 500 billion years ago, where we have the consolidated masses like our brothers in Latin America, South America, Central America, and so that there are these great significances that binds us together as a Caribbean people. So we're talking about natural disasters and the capitalism of natural disasters, as our brethren from Barbuda clearly indicated what could happen when natural disasters struck us. So what are our natural disasters in the Caribbean? Originally, we are volcanic in origin. And as we can see recently, what has been happening just to the north of us, the Caribbean, in the Grenadines, on St. Vincent, Haruna, with the advent of La Soufri volcano, we see all that is happening all today, the impacts that this can cause. Then we also know that because of volcanoes, we must, and vice versa. And then we have to the south of the Caribbean, the largest submarine volcano on Earth in the Atlantic, that is the Kikomjeni, north of Grenada, only 60 miles, 6 kilometers in our ocean, where we have a number of other small islands that makes up our tri-island states. Then accompanying volcanoes, earthquakes, which we all subjected to depending on the intensity of these processes, these natural processes, then we have tsunamis, we have landslides. All of these are connected. And of course, the one that we really know today very clearly because of its frequency in the latter 20 years, passing through the southern part of the Caribbean and even to our brothers in the Leeward Island, the hurricanes. Raymond, and then we have now exacerbating.
We have to finish. Can you maybe wrap up your question if it's a question? We have to finish. We only have a minute.
I was commenting on what I was hearing, because what I'm saying is that we are not fully understand the origin of the Caribbean to talk about disaster management and what are the impacts of the disaster management in all the challenges that I've heard today, and how we can, how could we as a Caribbean people overcome this dilemma or trilemma or pentalemma with regards to the challenges that countries are facing due to climate change and all those disasters. So I have proposal. I have a sheet of information. I will just say briefly in dot points for what we can do to deal with our Caribbean disasters and the imperialism and capitalism involved in it. One, we need to have continuous awareness campaign from the kindergarten to wherever to our natural human life. So that means that the workshops of NGOs, CBOs, government officials should be an ongoing process with respect to teaching and understanding all these different situations. We need to have continuous drilled to respond to natural disasters. I will take example of here in Germany. We have natural people in the communities, what they call the THW, the technical his work, which involve every human being in his community that will be trained to deal with natural disasters. So like for us in the Caribbean, we do not need for people to come from abroad after a week to take care of our own issues if we would train each and every boy and girl at school that we had those type of things before. And many more type of training and stuff like that. And of course, as Jay said, we are a revolutionary country in Grenada, and it only takes a revolution to change. But the revolution that we need right now is a revolution of the mind, a renaissance of thinking with respect to every community, every person, and of course, more importantly, those individuals who decide to take leadership to run our country as prime ministers, and those who are selling out our country a beautiful land, that we have this discussion here today. So those are the input I would like to inculcate here at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you. That's a really valuable last comment. I'm so sorry. Like we really have to finish. I know there's a few questions in the chat. I'm afraid we can't really go into them now, but I really think this is the start of a conversation. Hopefully, we can have a follow-up webinar on this, a follow-up meeting. So please do stay in touch. I'm going to pass over to Catalina, who may have a few last words from Edgar. I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to everybody. Just well, saying goodbye. Well, we're building a letter to address it from all these community leaders to United Nations Human Rights Office and well, some other international offices in order to express these vulnerabilities, these human rights issues that are being violated in all the Caribbean. So I think we have to move also in the international law. Edgar just told me, we talked with him, he is preparing the paro, the strike. There's going to be a strike in 2 days in all Providence, and he is organizing the strike. So he said, he's with everybody. He says, thank you to all, and that he's committed with whatever we decide we're going to work, because this is a space that we're building to try to build some strategies, common strategies, exchange experiences. And so he told me he couldn't connect right now. So he said, thanks to everybody. Thank you, Line, and everybody for your wonderful presentations. Oh, we're going to edit this video, and as soon as we have it edited, Oscar has told me he wants to help us with this. We're going to send it by YouTube. So sooner or later, we'll send it to you. Thank you to all. But here, there are some people from all Providence here in this meeting. Also, I'm from St. Andrews. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Solidarity forever.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was saying solidarity forever.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for organizing and keeping the hackers off our heels.
We are so sorry for all the interruptions, but I really, really appreciate the calm of all of you speakers and all of you for staying on. And this is, I guess, like the new reality that we're in. So very, very sorry about that, but we will share the recording and really hope to stay in touch. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everyone. Trials only come to make us strong, so let's keep at it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Lynn, thanks.
Bye, David, gracias.
Bye, thank you to everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, John. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, John.
Bye.